Breaking: Roman Reigns just destroyed Jey Uso on Raw and the Bloodline is imploding right before our eyes. I am absolutely shaking with fury right now because what Roman Reigns just did to Jey Uso on Monday Night Raw is the most disgusting, disrespectful, and unforgivable display of family betrayal I have ever witnessed in professional wrestling. After everything Jey has done for Roman, after years of loyalty and sacrifice, Roman Reigns looked his own cousin in the eyes on live television and threatened him, humiliated him, and made it crystal clear that Jey Uso means nothing to the tribal chief. And here's what's making me absolutely livid: this all happened because of what went down at Crown Jewel. Jey Uso made one decision to protect his own integrity, one moment where he chose to do the right thing instead of blindly following Roman's orders, and Roman responded by verbally destroying Jey in front of millions of people watching around the world. The tribal chief didn't just warn Jey, he humiliated him, belittled him, and threatened to end his career if Jey ever crosses him again. But I need to know from you right now, is Roman Reigns the most toxic and abusive leader in WWE history, or is Jey Uso disloyal for not following the tribal chief's orders? Are you disgusted by Roman's treatment of his own family, or do you think Jey deserved to be put in his place? Tell me in the comments right now, because what I'm about to reveal about what happened at Crown Jewel, Roman's explosive warning on Raw, and how this is destroying the bloodline from the inside is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and what it means to be the tribal chief. Let me take you through exactly what happened at Crown Jewel, because understanding that event is crucial to comprehending why Roman exploded on Jey during Raw. Crown Jewel was already a massive event with huge stakes. Roman Reigns was defending his position as the tribal chief in a high-profile match. The bloodline was ringside, as they always are, to ensure Roman maintained his dominance. Jey Uso, Solo Sikoa, and the rest of the family were there to have Roman's back and do whatever was necessary to secure victory. The match was going according to plan. Roman was in control, his opponent was struggling, and it looked like another successful title defense was inevitable. But then something happened that changed everything and set off the chain of events that led to Raw's explosive confrontation. Roman's opponent started mounting a comeback. The crowd was going crazy. The momentum had shifted, and Roman found himself in a vulnerable position for the first time in the match. He looked to the outside, clearly expecting the bloodline to intervene and help him regain control. Solo Sikoa moved first, creating a distraction that allowed Roman to catch his breath. But Roman needed more. He needed someone to directly interfere, to give him the advantage that would allow him to put his opponent away. And Roman looked directly at Jey Uso and gave him a clear signal to get involved. And Jey hesitated. For the first time in years, Jey Uso didn't immediately jump to follow Roman's command. Jey stood at ringside, clearly torn between his loyalty to Roman and something else, perhaps his conscience, perhaps his respect for the business, perhaps his own self-respect that had been beaten down by years of Roman's manipulation. That hesitation lasted maybe 5 seconds. But those 5 seconds felt like an eternity. And in those 5 seconds, Roman's opponent hit a devastating move that nearly won them the match. Roman kicked out at 2.9, barely surviving what should have been a 3 count. Quick question: have you ever seen Jey Uso hesitate to help Roman before this moment? Drop yes or no in the comments, because this is historically significant. Roman eventually won the match, he always does, but the damage was done. That moment of hesitation from Jey Uso had nearly cost Roman everything, and you could see on Roman's face as his hand was raised that he was furious. Not relieved that he'd won, not celebrating his victory, just pure, cold rage directed at Jey Uso. After the match, backstage at Crown Jewel, witnesses reported that Roman confronted Jey immediately. They had a heated exchange that had to be broken up by other bloodline members. Roman was screaming at Jey about loyalty and family. Jey was trying to explain himself, saying something about wanting to win the right way and not wanting to cheat. And that explanation made Roman even more angry. Because to Roman, there is no right way, there's only winning and losing. There's only maintaining power and losing power. And anyone who doesn't understand that, even family, is a liability. The confrontation at Crown Jewel was kept relatively private, with only a few wrestlers and staff witnessing it. But everyone knew that this wasn't over. Everyone knew that Roman was going to make an example of Jey, and that example would be public and brutal. And that's exactly what happened on Raw. Roman didn't wait. He didn't let it cool down. He brought that rage and that need to assert dominance directly to Monday Night Raw, where the entire world would witness what happens when you cross the tribal chief. Now let me describe what happened on Raw in excruciating detail, because every moment was calculated to break Jey Uso down psychologically and remind everyone watching that Roman Reigns tolerates no disobedience. Raw opened with Roman Reigns' music hitting immediately. No preliminaries, no other segments. First, Roman wanted to set the tone for the entire night by addressing this situation right away. Roman walked out with Solo Sikoa, Paul Heyman, and the rest of the bloodline, but notably, Jey Uso was not with them initially. Roman grabbed a microphone and the crowd was already buzzing because everyone had heard rumors about the tension at Crown Jewel. Roman stood in the ring with that cold, calculated look on his face, the look that means someone is about to get verbally destroyed. Roman started by talking about Crown Jewel, about his victory, and about how the Bloodline continues to dominate WWE despite everyone trying to tear them down. Standard tribal chief promo material. But then his tone changed. It got darker, more personal, more menacing. Roman said, "But there's something we need to address. Something that happened at Crown Jewel that I cannot and will not ignore. Because being the tribal chief isn't just about being the best wrestler in the world, it's about maintaining order. It's about ensuring that everyone in this family understands their role and executes that role without question." The crowd started to understand where this was going. Roman was building to something, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. Then Roman called for Jey Uso to come to the ring. And the way he said it, it wasn't a request, it was a command. It was a parent summoning a child who's about to be punished. It was a boss calling an employee to fire them. It sent chills down everyone's spines because we all knew Jey was walking into a nightmare. What did you think when Roman called Jey to the ring? Did you think Jey would refuse to come out? Tell me your immediate reaction in the comments. Jey's music hit and he walked out slowly. You could see the internal conflict written all over his face. Jey knew what was coming. He knew he was about to be humiliated in front of millions of people. But what choice did he have? If he refused to come out, that would be even worse. So Jey walked down that ramp like a man walking to his own execution. When Jey got in the ring, he stood across from Roman, and the tension was suffocating. The crowd was silent, just waiting to see what Roman would do. Paul Heyman was nervously looking between Roman and Jey. Solo Sikoa stood stone-faced, his loyalty clearly with Roman but perhaps some small part of him feeling sympathy for Jey. Roman let the silence hang for what felt like forever, just staring at Jey, making Jey uncomfortable, establishing his dominance through pure presence and intimidation. And then Roman started to speak, and what came out was vicious. Roman recounted what happened at Crown Jewel in his version of events. He described how Jey's hesitation nearly cost him the match, how Jey's moment of weakness nearly destroyed everything the Bloodline has built, how Jey's disloyalty almost handed their enemies a victory and damaged Roman's legacy. But here's the thing, Roman didn't yell. He didn't scream. He delivered this entire tirade in a calm, measured tone that was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been raging. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to break Jey down completely. Roman said, "I've given you everything, Jey. I took you and Jimmy from being good tag team wrestlers and made you the greatest tag team champions in history. I gave you main event status. I gave you purpose and direction. I made you matter. And this is how you repay me? By hesitating when I needed you most." Jey tried to respond, tried to explain, but Roman cut him off immediately. Roman said, "I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear explanations. I want to hear one thing and one thing only. I want to hear you acknowledge that you messed up. I want to hear you acknowledge that you're sorry. And I want to hear you acknowledge that it will never happen again." The crowd started booing because they could see what this was: Roman forcing Jey to publicly debase himself and beg for forgiveness for daring to have a moment of conscience. And here's where it got even worse. Jey, to his credit, stood tall. He looked Roman in the eyes and said, "I'm not going to apologize for wanting to win the right way. I'm not going to apologize for having standards and principles. You taught me that family is everything, but family also means having each other's backs even when we disagree." The crowd erupted in support of Jey. Because Jey was finally standing up for himself after years of abuse and manipulation from Roman. Jey was showing that he had a backbone and wouldn't just be Roman's puppet anymore. But Roman's expression didn't change. If anything, he got colder. And what Roman said next sent shockwaves through the entire arena. Before I tell you what Roman said, I want to know, were you proud of Jey for standing up to Roman, or did you think Jey should have just apologized to keep the peace? This is important, tell me in the comments. Roman stepped closer to Jey, got right in his face, and said in a voice barely above a whisper but picked up by the microphone, "You think you can stand here and defy me? You think you can question my decisions and my leadership? Let me make something very clear to you, Jey. You are nothing without me. You were nothing before I elevated you. And if you ever hesitate again, if you ever question my authority again, I will make sure you go back to being nothing. You'll be wrestling in empty arenas in front of nobody, and everyone will forget you ever existed. Is that what you want?" That threat was devastating. Roman wasn't just threatening to remove Jey from the Bloodline, he was threatening to destroy Jey's entire career, his legacy, everything he'd worked for his entire life. That's not leadership, that's tyranny. That's psychological abuse disguised as family loyalty. Jey stood there, clearly fighting every instinct to either attack Roman or break down emotionally. You could see tears forming in Jey's eyes, not from physical pain but from the emotional trauma of having his own family member threaten to destroy him over one moment of hesitation. And then Roman delivered the final blow. He turned to Solo Sikoa and said, "If Jey can't be trusted, then maybe we need to evaluate his position in this family. Solo, you're now my number one. Jey is on probation. One more mistake, one more moment of disloyalty, and he's out." The crowd was booing so loud you could barely hear anything else. Because this was beyond wrestling storylines, this felt real. This felt like genuine family dysfunction and abuse playing out in front of a global audience. Jey looked absolutely broken. Not defeated in a wrestling sense, but genuinely emotionally devastated. He looked at Roman like he was looking at a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. And then Jey did something that shocked everyone. He took off his Bloodline shirt right there in the ring and dropped it at Roman's feet. The entire arena gasped. Was Jey quitting the Bloodline? Was this the moment where Jey finally said enough is enough and walked away from his toxic family situation? But before anyone could process what was happening, Solo Sikoa attacked Jey from behind. Solo hit Jey with a devastating Samoan spike that dropped Jey instantly. And Roman just stood there watching, not stopping it, allowing his family to tear itself apart. Solo continued the assault, hitting multiple moves on Jey while Roman watched with that cold expression. Paul Heyman was pleading with Roman to stop it, saying that this was going too far, but Roman ignored him completely. Finally, Roman raised his hand and Solo stopped. Jey was laid out in the middle of the ring, bloodied and beaten by his own family. And Roman stood over him and said, "This is what happens when you cross the tribal chief. Let this be a lesson to everyone, family or not. If you're not with me, you're against me." Roman's music hit and he walked out, leaving Jey broken and bleeding in the ring. It was one of the most uncomfortable and disturbing segments in recent WWE history because it felt too real, too personal, and too much like genuine abuse rather than wrestling storytelling. On a scale of 1 to 10, how uncomfortable did this segment make you? And do you think WWE went too far with how dark and abusive they portrayed Roman? Let me know. Now let's discuss the aftermath of this segment because the fallout has been massive and has divided the wrestling community like few storylines have. Social media exploded immediately after Raw. Jey Uso was trending worldwide. People were posting crying emojis, expressing genuine emotional distress at watching Jey be humiliated and attacked by his own family. This wasn't fans being worked in a fun way, this was fans being genuinely upset and disturbed by what they'd witnessed. Wrestling journalists and analysts have been debating whether WWE crossed a line with this segment. Some are praising it as brilliant storytelling that generates genuine emotional investment. Others are criticizing it as being too dark and depicting abusive family dynamics in a way that's harmful and irresponsible. Mental health advocates have weighed in, pointing out that what Roman is doing to Jey is textbook psychological abuse and manipulation. They're concerned that WWE is portraying this behavior without adequate context or condemnation, potentially normalizing abusive family relationships for younger viewers. But WWE defenders argue that Roman is a heel. He's supposed to be the villain. Portraying him as abusive and terrible is exactly what makes him an effective villain. And ultimately, the story will, presumably, end with Jey overcoming Roman and getting justice, which sends the message that this behavior is wrong and has consequences. Both sides have valid points. This is complex storytelling that doesn't have easy answers about whether it's appropriate or not. What's your take? Is this brilliant heel storytelling, or has WWE gone too far in depicting family abuse? This is a serious question, give me your honest opinion. Let's talk about Jey Uso's character arc because what we're witnessing is potentially the most compelling character development in wrestling right now. Jey Uso started as one half of the Usos, a great tag team but not particularly distinguished individually. When the Bloodline formed and Roman became the tribal chief, Jey was positioned as Roman's right-hand man, the loyal cousin who would do anything for family. But over the past few years, we've watched Jey slowly begin to question that loyalty. Little moments where you could see doubt in his eyes. Instances where Jey looked uncomfortable with Roman's methods but went along anyway. The cracks in Jey's loyalty have been building for a long time. The hesitation at Crown Jewel was Jey's conscience finally breaking through years of conditioning and manipulation. It was Jey's true self momentarily overriding the role Roman had forced him into. And Roman's response on Raw was designed to crush that spark of independence and remind Jey of his place. But here's what's beautiful about this storytelling: even though Jey got brutalized, even though he was humiliated and beaten down, Jey showed strength. He stood up to Roman verbally even knowing the consequences. He refused to grovel and apologize for having principles. He dropped the Bloodline shirt, symbolically rejecting the toxic family dynamics even though he paid a price for it. Jey is becoming a babyface right before our eyes, not through typical wrestling means of fighting bad guys, but through the much more relatable and human process of standing up to an abusive family member and choosing self-respect over toxic loyalty. That's powerful storytelling. That's the kind of character arc that resonates with people because many viewers have experienced similar family dynamics in their own lives. They've had family members who manipulate them, control them, and punish them for having boundaries. Jey's story is their story. Can you relate to Jey Uso's situation of being in a toxic family dynamic? Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was treating you poorly? Share your story in the comments if you're comfortable. Let's support each other. Now let's discuss Solo Sikoa's role in all this because Solo attacking Jey is significant and reveals a lot about Bloodline dynamics. Solo Sikoa has been positioned as Roman's enforcer, the silent destroyer who carries out Roman's will without question or hesitation. Solo doesn't talk much, he just acts. And his actions are always in service of maintaining Roman's power and dominance. But Solo attacking Jey after Roman's verbal takedown shows that Solo has chosen Roman over family relationships. Solo and Jey are family too, they're not just colleagues in a faction. By attacking Jey, Solo is making it clear that loyalty to Roman supersedes all other family bonds. That's both terrifying and sad. It shows how completely Roman has warped the concept of family within the bloodline. Instead of family meaning mutual support and love, family now means absolute obedience to the tribal chief. Anyone who doesn't comply gets treated like an enemy, even if they're blood relatives. Solo's attack also positions him as the good soldier in contrast to Jey's rebellion. Roman is clearly favoring Solo now because Solo does exactly what he's told without moral qualms or hesitation. That creates an interesting dynamic where Jey and Solo might end up in direct conflict, with Solo serving as Roman's weapon against Jey's independence. There's also the question of whether Solo agrees with what he's doing or if he's just following orders. Does Solo genuinely believe Jey deserved to be attacked? Or is Solo uncomfortable with the situation but too afraid of Roman to refuse? We don't know because Solo doesn't speak, which makes him a fascinating enigma in this storyline. Do you think Solo Sikoa genuinely supports Roman's treatment of Jey, or is Solo just following orders and might eventually turn on Roman too? Give me your analysis. Let's talk about Paul Heyman's reaction during all this because Paul's role is crucial and often overlooked. Paul Heyman is positioned as the wise man, Roman's advocate and advisor. But during the Raw segment, Paul was clearly uncomfortable with how far Roman was taking things. Paul was seen trying to calm Roman down, suggesting that maybe they could handle this differently, and looking genuinely distressed when Solo attacked Jey. This is interesting because it suggests that even Paul Heyman, who has been Roman's most loyal supporter, thinks Roman has crossed a line. Paul built his career on managing dangerous, dominant wrestlers, but what Roman is doing goes beyond professional dominance into personal cruelty and family destruction. Paul's discomfort creates another crack in the bloodline's foundation. If even the wise man thinks Roman is going too far, who else in the bloodline might be having doubts? Are there other members who see what happened to Jey and worry they could be next if they make one mistake? Paul's role moving forward will be fascinating to watch. Does he continue supporting Roman despite his reservations? Does he try to counsel Roman to be less tyrannical? Does he potentially become a voice advocating for Jey's return to the group? Or does Paul eventually decide that Roman has become a monster he can no longer support? Any of those directions would be compelling character development for Paul Heyman. There's also historical precedent for Paul Heyman turning on the monster he created. Paul has managed many dominant champions who eventually became too dangerous or too difficult to control. Roman might be heading down that same path, and Paul might eventually decide that his association with Roman is damaging his own legacy. What should Paul Heyman do? Stay loyal to Roman, try to change Roman's behavior, or eventually turn on Roman? Tell me what you think Paul's next move should be. Now let's discuss where the storyline goes from here because the immediate future of the bloodline is absolutely fascinating with multiple possible directions. Direction 1: Jey goes on a revenge tour, attacking bloodline members and specifically targeting Solo Sikoa for the betrayal. This builds to a Jey vs Solo match where Jey gets some measure of payback. Eventually, this leads to Jey vs Roman in a match where Jey fights to reclaim his dignity and prove he's not nothing without Roman. Direction 2: Jey leaves WWE television for a few weeks to recover from the attack, giving the audience time to miss him and anticipate his return. When Jey comes back, he's a changed man, more aggressive, more focused, and completely done with Roman's manipulation. Jey rallies other wrestlers who've been victimized by the bloodline to form an anti-bloodline coalition. Direction 3: Jey tries to win back Roman's approval, going on a winning streak and proving his loyalty, but Roman continues to reject and punish him. This creates sympathy for Jey as audiences watch him desperately try to win back his abuser's love, which is a heartbreaking but realistic depiction of abuse dynamics. Eventually, Jey has a breaking point where he realizes he'll never be good enough for Roman and finally walks away for good. Direction 4: Jimmy Uso returns to WWE and has to choose between his twin brother Jey and his cousin Roman. Jimmy's choice determines the future of the bloodline and potentially sets up a family civil war where different Anoa'i family members take sides. Direction 5: Roman doubles down on his tyranny and actually removes Jey from the bloodline entirely, replacing him with another family member, Jacob Fatu, perhaps. This forces Jey to rebuild his identity and career completely separate from the bloodline, proving he can be something without Roman. Any of these directions could work, and WWE might combine elements from multiple options. The key is that Jey needs a satisfying arc that eventually leads to him overcoming Roman's abuse and proving his worth. Which storyline direction do you want to see? Give me your number 1 through 5 choice, or suggest your own completely different direction in the comments. Let's address the Jimmy Uso factor because Jey's twin brother is currently absent from WWE but obviously exists in this universe and has to factor into this story eventually. Jimmy Uso left the bloodline before Jey did, unable to handle Roman's increasingly tyrannical leadership. Jimmy saw what Roman was becoming and got out before it destroyed him completely. That makes Jimmy the smart one who escaped the abusive family dynamic first. When Jimmy inevitably returns to WWE, his reunion with Jey will be emotional. Jimmy will see what Roman has done to Jey and will be filled with rage and guilt, rage at Roman for hurting his brother, and guilt that he wasn't there to protect Jey. The Usos reuniting as a tag team outside of the bloodline structure would be huge. The greatest tag team of this generation, freed from Roman's control, fighting back against the family that abused them. That's compelling storytelling that writes itself. But there's also the possibility of tension between Jimmy and Jey. Jimmy might feel that Jey should have left the bloodline earlier, that Jey stayed too long and allowed too much abuse. Jey might resent Jimmy for abandoning him and leaving him alone to deal with Roman. Those are legitimate feelings that could create conflict even as they're reuniting. The Usos versus the bloodline, Roman and Solo plus whoever else, is a dream feud that could main event any major WWE event. Brothers versus cousins, with family pride and personal dignity on the line. That's the kind of emotional storytelling that elevates wrestling beyond just athletic competition. When Jimmy Uso returns, should he immediately team with Jey against the bloodline, or should there be tension between the twins first? What would make better TV? Now I want to talk about Roman Reigns as a character because what he's become is absolutely fascinating from a wrestling psychology perspective. Roman started his tribal chief run as a confident, dominant champion who wasn't afraid to bend the rules to maintain his power. He was a heel, but a cool heel that some fans still cheered for because he was so good at what he did. But over time, Roman has evolved into something much darker. He's not just a wrestling heel anymore, he's a genuinely abusive tyrant who maintains power through fear, manipulation, and psychological torture. He's become a character that's genuinely difficult to like or root for in any capacity. That's brave booking from WWE. They're willing to make their top star genuinely unlikable and despicable. They're not worried about Roman selling merchandise or getting cheers, they're committed to telling a story about the corrupting nature of power and how absolute authority turns people into monsters. Roman's treatment of Jey mirrors real-world abusive dynamics so closely that it's uncomfortable. The way Roman makes Jey feel worthless without him, the way Roman punishes any independence or disagreement, the way Roman uses family and loyalty as weapons to control behavior, these are all tactics that real abusers use in real relationships. WWE is essentially using their largest platform to tell a story about abuse and, hopefully, the triumph of standing up to your abuser. That's powerful if they commit to the ending where Jey gets justice. But it's problematic if Roman just continues to dominate without real consequences for his behavior. The key question is, can Roman ever be a babyface again after this? Has he crossed so many lines and done such terrible things that audiences will never be able to cheer for him again? Or is wrestling such that with the right booking and passage of time, even the worst villain can be rehabilitated? Personally, I think Roman has reached a point of no return. What he's done to Jey and his family is so heinous that I can't imagine a scenario where I'd cheer for Roman. But I've been surprised before by wrestling's ability to reshape narratives and character perceptions. Has Roman Reigns become too evil to ever be a babyface again? Can you ever imagine cheering for Roman after watching him abuse his family? Tell me your thoughts. Let's discuss the real-world parallel to this storyline because the bloodline story is rooted in the actual Anoa'i wrestling family. The Anoa'i family is legendary in wrestling, spanning multiple generations with members including The Rock, Yokozuna, Rikishi, Umaga, and many others. It's a family with incredible wrestling pedigree and a legitimate claim to being wrestling royalty. But like all families, the Anoa'i family surely has its own internal dynamics, disagreements, and tensions. WWE is presumably fictionalizing and dramatizing those dynamics for storyline purposes, but there's likely some kernel of truth in the story they're telling. The question of who leads the family, how decisions get made, how younger generation members earn respect, and how the family's legacy gets protected are all real issues that any family business faces. The Bloodline storyline is essentially a soap opera about family business succession and power dynamics. That real-world connection makes the story more compelling because we know these people are actually related. When we see Roman and Jey conflict, we know they're real cousins who presumably have a real relationship outside of WWE. That adds weight and authenticity that purely fictional characters couldn't achieve. There's also the question of how the Anoa'i family feels about this storyline. Are they comfortable with WWE depicting their family as dysfunctional and abusive? Do they see this as effective storytelling or as potentially damaging to their family's reputation? We don't know because the family hasn't publicly commented, but it's a valid question. Do you think the Anoa'i family is okay with how WWE is portraying their family dynamics, or might there be real tension about this storyline? Give me your thoughts on the real-world implications. Now let's address what this means for WWE's storytelling overall because the Bloodline saga represents a specific approach to long-term narrative that WWE hasn't always been good at executing. The Bloodline story has been building for years. It's not a quick 3-month feud that gets resolved at a pay-per-view and then everyone moves on. This is generational storytelling with multiple chapters, character arcs, and emotional beats that pay off over extended periods. That's the kind of storytelling that creates investment. Audiences care about these characters because they've spent years watching them develop and change. We've seen Roman's evolution into tyranny. We've seen Jey's slow awakening to the abuse. We've seen Jimmy's escape. We've seen Solo's rise as Roman's enforcer. These aren't one-dimensional characters, they're fully realized people with motivations, flaws, and arcs. That's what great storytelling looks like, and it's what WWE should aspire to do with more of their storylines. The challenge for WWE is maintaining this quality across their entire roster. The Bloodline gets this level of attention and care because they're positioned as the top act. But mid-card and lower-card wrestlers often get storylines that are inconsistent, dropped without resolution, or just plain nonsensical. If WWE could apply the same long-term thinking and character development to their entire roster that they've applied to the Bloodline, WWE's overall product would be dramatically better. Audiences would be more invested in everyone, not just the top stars. The Bloodline is proving that audiences want complex, long-term storytelling with real emotional stakes. WWE needs to learn from this success and apply those lessons more broadly. What other WWE storyline has been as consistently good as the Bloodline over the past few years? Can you think of anything that comes close to this level of long-term storytelling? Let me know. As we approach the end of this discussion, I want to bring everything back to the emotional core of why this story matters and why millions of people are invested in what happens next. This isn't really a story about wrestling. Yes, it takes place in a wrestling ring and will ultimately be resolved through wrestling matches. But at its heart, this is a story about family, abuse, and liberation. It's about a person, Jey, who has been trapped in a toxic family dynamic, controlled and manipulated by someone who claims to love him, Roman. It's about that person slowly awakening to the reality that this relationship is unhealthy and damaging. And it's about that person finding the courage to stand up for themselves and break free, even though it's terrifying and painful. That's a universal human story that transcends wrestling. Everyone knows what it's like to be in a relationship, whether family, romantic, or friendship, that isn't healthy. Everyone knows how hard it is to leave those relationships even when you know you should. Everyone knows the fear of standing up to someone who has power over you. Jey's story is resonating because it's our story. When we watch Jey stand up to Roman despite knowing he'll be punished, we're vicariously experiencing the courage we wish we had in our own lives. When we see Jey get beaten down and humiliated, we feel that pain because many of us have been there. And when Jey eventually overcomes Roman and reclaims his dignity, because that has to be where the story is going, we'll all feel the triumph as if it were our own. We'll celebrate Jey's liberation as a symbol of hope that we too can break free from whatever toxic situations we're dealing with. That is why this story matters. That's why it's more than just wrestling. And that's why WWE needs to get the ending right and give Jey the triumphant conclusion he and the audience deserve. Have you ever escaped a toxic relationship and rebuilt your life? If so, share your story of triumph in the comments to inspire others who might be struggling. Let me wrap this up with my final thoughts and the questions I need you to answer. What happened on Raw was brutal, uncomfortable, and absolutely riveting television. Roman Reigns' warning and humiliating Jey Uso after Crown Jewel has set in motion a storyline that could define WWE for the next year. The Bloodline is imploding, family is turning against family, and one man's fight for dignity and self-respect is playing out on the biggest stage in wrestling. This is real storytelling with real emotional stakes that audiences genuinely care about. This is what wrestling should be, athletic competition wrapped in compelling human drama that makes us feel something. WWE has created something special here. Now they need to stick the landing and give us the payoff we deserve. So here's what I need from you: smash that like button if you're as invested in this story as I am. Subscribe to Wrestling Newsletter because we're covering every single development in the Bloodline saga as it unfolds. Turn on notifications so you don't miss breaking news about Jey, Roman, and the future of this incredible storyline. And flood the comments with your thoughts on these critical questions. Is Roman Reigns the most despicable villain in modern WWE? Does Jey Uso deserve our sympathy, or should he have left the Bloodline sooner? How should this storyline end to be satisfying? Will Solo Sikoa eventually turn on Roman too? When Jimmy Uso returns, what should happen? On a personal level, does this storyline remind you of anything in your own life? What match do you most want to see come out of this storyline? I'm reading every comment because this story has clearly struck a nerve with the wrestling community and I want to hear all of your perspectives and reactions. Roman Reigns has declared war on his own family. Jey Uso is fighting for his dignity and his future. The Bloodline is tearing itself apart from the inside. And we're all witnesses to one of the most compelling storylines in wrestling history. This is Wrestling Newsletter, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue following every twist and turn in the saga of the Bloodline, Roman Reigns, and Jey Uso's fight for liberation.